I'll try to be as brief as possible and stick to the relevant events that are giving me this feeling. The latest event happened just last night, and I didn't get much sleep, so apologies if I ramble a bit. My wife and I recently purchased our first home after the birth of our daughter. Everything was as you would expect for the first few months. Painting, decorating, renovating, basking in our newfound slice of the American dream. You get the idea. Unusual things started happening several months ago, though. One day, as I was just getting home after work, I passed by this strange truck, 2 or 3 houses down from ours. Now, I say strange for a few reasons. We literally know everyone in our small neighborhood, and I'd never seen this truck before. There was no reason for through traffic to come down our street, and the truck was driving very slowly. The sort of driving you'd get if you put the car in drive but didn't press on the gas at all. As I pulled into the driveway, the car immediately flipped a U-turn and came back towards my house. Getting out of my vehicle, the truck crawled by, and I could see the driver staring daggers at me as he passed. He then sped off. I don't like to judge based on appearances, and I'd like to think I don't scare that easily, but something about this guy's eyes gave me a bad feeling. Obviously, this was very weird. I mentioned what happened to my wife, telling her maybe we should be more mindful about security. When I told her about the type of truck I'd seen, my wife had this to add. That same truck drove by and that guy stared at me when I got home this afternoon. I thought he was just being creepy and checking me out. I tried to tease her a bit to lighten the mood, calling her cocky for assuming any guy driving by must be checking her out. I didn't want her to get unnerved, but I was definitely freaking out a bit. We continued to see the truck multiple times over the next couple of weeks, either driving by slowly or parked just down the block and facing our yard. One day, the truck just stopped driving by, and we didn't see it ever since. I sort of dismissed the whole thing as me being paranoid because of that, but then other strange things started happening. In the past month or so, my wife and I have been hearing tapping on the windows at the front of our house at night. It's happened 2 or 3 times to each of us separately, always at exactly 10 or 11, always a soft and distinct tapping. It almost sounded like someone knocking with a single knuckle on the metal part of a screen door, if that makes sense. The first time that my wife and I heard the tapping together was just last weekend. We were in the front room playing with our daughter. It was around 9:30 or so. We were about to settle her down for bed. Our front room has a large, almost floor-to-ceiling window running the length of the wall next to the door. It faces the street. We were all sitting on the floor with our backs to that window, reading our daughter a book, when we began to hear it. Now, our house is older. Creaks and cracks are not uncommon, but this sound was so distinct and intentional that my wife and I immediately looked at each other and bolted out of the room. Had my wife and daughter locked themselves in a back room, while I turned on all the lights and did a sweep around the outside of the house. Of course, I didn't see anything. I was ready to dismiss this all as nothing more than paranoia, or something that probably had an innocent explanation. That was until last night. Around 9:45, we heard our daughter making noise in the baby monitor. I waited a few minutes to see if she would settle down a bit, but when it became clear she would not, I got up to put her back to sleep. The layout of the room is important to visualize this next part. This room is on the side of our house, but the exterior wall juts out in a bit of an L shape, and the corner of the L is made up of windows. If you're standing in the door to the room, you're directly across from these windows. There's a rocking chair in the other corner pointed toward the front of the house. One window faces the street, the other faces our neighbor's house. A garden bed planted with small shrubs wraps around the outside directly underneath. I was sitting in that chair getting my daughter settled down. I had a lamp on, so the room was softly lit. Once she fell asleep, I stood up to put her in her crib when something strange caught my eye. There was a figure standing about a foot away from the window, in the space between the shrubs and the house. They were staring in at us. I didn't look long enough to see anything more than what appeared to be a man in a light gray hoodie, standing a few feet away on the other side of the glass. Sprinting from the room, I brought my daughter back to my wife and I's bedroom, leaving her there while telling my understandably confused wife to lock the door. After turning off all the lights inside and turning on all the lights outside, I began moving from room to room, peering out the windows into the darkness. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Whoever it was must have taken off after seeing me notice them and made a quick exit. Obviously, I had some trouble sleeping after this. I spent hours checking security cameras and going from room to room looking out the windows, hoping but also not hoping I would see anything that could explain what had happened. This morning, I went outside to the spot where I thought the figure would have been standing. I'd hoped that maybe there was a plant or something I mistook for a person, but when I got to that spot, I realized the figure had been standing in a bare patch of ground directly in front of that window. With everything that's been happening, I can't shake the feeling that for some reason, there's somebody watching our family. I just hope I'm wrong. My name is Bree. This happened in 2016. I was 19 years old at the time. I was up late the night before into the early morning studying, and I hadn't had very much sleep. I had just woken up from a nap I'd taken to catch up, and I decided to hop in the shower to wake myself up a bit. And that's when I started to hear this weird scraping sound coming from somewhere outside. I stopped the shower and peered out from behind the curtain. I then made my way over to the window. I couldn't see anything out there, but I could still hear that scraping noise. I thought it may have been my neighbor working in a shed or something, so I ignored the disturbance and finished up my showering business before I continued. I should inform you that I have severe anxiety problems, and I often get a little bit paranoid. It doesn't help that I have a form of PTSD as well. Anyway, I was now back in my room. I took a seat on my bed and texted my boyfriend. I asked him what he wanted for dinner. While I was waiting for him to respond, I relaxed and scrolled through my Facebook. I was reading an article about the recent clown sightings that were happening at the time. And that was when I was interrupted by the sound of footsteps coming from outside. I stopped and listened in carefully. I could hear more footsteps, followed by a tapping noise. I was a bit confused. It hadn't yet occurred to me that I could have an unwelcomed guest outside. I was thinking to myself, why wouldn't my boyfriend knock on the door or call before he showed up? We usually had a routine with things like this, especially if I was home alone. He would either call or FaceTime me to let me know when he was on his way. There had been a lot of shady activity around our neighborhood at the time. I called out, and suddenly all fell silent. I texted my boyfriend and asked him if that was him at the door. There was no reply. I decided to peek through the bedroom window. While I was making my way to the other side of the room, my phone started ringing. It was my boyfriend wanting to FaceTime. When I answered, he said he was 15 minutes away. As I was talking to him, I pulled back the curtains of my bedroom window, and that's when all the blood in my veins turned to ice. I found myself face to face with a clown. I knew I wasn't hallucinating. An actual clown was looking at me through the window, smiling. After my initial shock, I actually started to laugh, thinking that this had to be some sort of prank my boyfriend was pulling on me. I played along, pretending to be terrified, and whispered into my phone. Very funny. I love the whole scary clown thing. I chuckled and rolled my eyes. My boyfriend was very confused. I explained to him about the clown at the window and said that he and his friend had done a good job scaring the piss out of me again. He said that all his friends were hanging out at the pub and that he was not part of any plans to prank me. Upon hearing this, I felt my stomach in my throat. I looked back at the clown outside. He reached into his costume and pulled out a very real-looking knife. By this point, I wasn't sure what was going on. I grabbed up my baseball bat. My boyfriend told me he was now only a few minutes away and shouted at me to stay inside and lock all the doors and windows. I quickly closed the curtains and went into the lounge. It wasn't long before I heard a loud pounding at the front door. Suddenly, I heard a creepy voice coming from the other side. "Let me in." I didn't respond to that voice. I stood perfectly still, waiting for their next move. The loud pounding rang out again, causing the door to rattle in its hinges, but I kept quiet even as I heard the doorknob rattling. I was pretty scared at this point, but I was also getting really irritated. Eventually, I had enough and yelled out, "Hey, fuck off! Go annoy someone else!" I heard a muffled laughter, followed by the creepy voice once more. "Please let me in, doll. I just want to play. I want to play with your insides." I had enough of this. I was about to go outside and beat this guy's ass myself. That was when I heard my boyfriend's voice, who was still on the phone. He said to hang up and call the cops. After some consideration, I thought maybe confronting the clown outside holding a knife was not the correct course of action, so I did as my boyfriend said. I left the lounge and was soon explaining the situation to the police dispatcher. I was on my way back to my room when I heard the sound of glass breaking. I stopped in my tracks and told him I thought the guy had just broken into my house. They immediately told me to get somewhere safe. And that's when I heard my boyfriend yelling out, "Hey, what the hell are you doing? Get out of here! The police are on their way!" The clown just bellowed out a psychotic laugh. They took off. As I made my way back into the bedroom, something caught my eye. I peered out the window through a gap in the curtains and saw another clown. He appeared to be holding some sort of blade in his hand. I went to move, but I was like a deer caught in the headlights. I couldn't do anything. Fear overcame me as I realized my boyfriend was out there with these two creepy clowns. I screamed into the phone that there was another one outside my bedroom. After a few moments, I was relieved when I heard my boyfriend at the back door. I let him inside, and we held each other until the police arrived. After taking our statements, the police discovered a rusted hacksaw and an axe lying on the ground outside my bedroom window. Of course, the creepy clowns that had turned my night into a freak show were nowhere to be found. After that night, I struggled to fall asleep. I often think to myself, what would have happened to me if I had been stupid enough to open that door? Were they just a couple of thrill seekers looking to frighten a girl who was all alone? Or were they in fact out for blood? The following happened last summer, and I haven't told anyone about it yet for some reason. I like taking late-night walks, especially during the summer. One night, I decided to take an unusual route, which I would later greatly regret. It was about 11 p.m. and the sun had already gone down. It wasn't completely dark yet, though. The road I was walking was quite long, and at the end of it, I could see someone moving toward me. I didn't think much of it, obviously. When he was about 90 feet away from me, though, he suddenly started to run. His running initially resembled somebody jogging, and that's what I thought he was doing at first, so I didn't really react. As he got closer, though, I could see he was wielding something in his hand. I now started to suspect something was wrong. He was finally about to run past me when he suddenly stopped right next to me and looked me in the eyes. He walked right up to me and said something that would haunt me forever from then on. "Why didn't you run? I could have killed you. I think you should run next time." As he was standing there next to me, I could see that the object he was holding was a stick taser like the ones you'd see guards using. The man then turned around and ran away. I still wonder what would have happened if I would have trusted my instincts in that moment and started to run. My family and I had a caravan in a holiday park in NSW. We would go there every school holiday, and there were many kids I used to run around and play with. I have very fond memories of this place, where I learned to ride a bike and had my first kiss even, but other memories are not as good, and now leave me with that egg flip feeling in my stomach. The people that owned the caravan park had a son. He was roughly 25 years old. I would have been around 5 or 6 at the time. He would drive around the park and collect everyone's rubbish on a tractor and do other odd jobs to help out his parents. Every once in a while, he would pull up when I was playing out front and ask if I wanted to ride on the tractor. Being young and naive, of course, I accepted and jumped right on. What child doesn't want to ride a tractor? This was back in the days where parents would let their children play in the streets. Without much or any supervision, you just came back home when the streetlights came on. One day, when he dropped me back to our van, my dad came storming out and grabbed me by the arm. He yanked me off the tractor. Without saying a word to the man, he took me inside and told me never ever to hang out with him again. "I don't want you going around with that man," he said, without saying why. "But he's nice. He gives me candy," I said. "Just don't. I'm telling you, do not talk to him," he replied. I couldn't understand why my dad didn't want me talking to such a nice man who gave me tractor rides, candy, and hugs, sometimes even the occasional sandwich. I remember just telling the man flat out one day, "My dad said I'm not allowed to talk to you anymore." He gave me a sort of smirk. "Oh yeah? Why's that?" Fast forward nearly 13 to 14 years later, my family and I were watching the news when suddenly the man's face flashed across the screen. It was attached to a story about how he'd killed multiple people and was now serving time in prison. My dad immediately caught on to this. "Look at that! Look at that!" I knew that guy was bad news. There was always something just off about him. You remember how he used to take you around on the tractor? My blood ran cold. My stomach dropped. The most disturbing part, he killed people with these pills he would make that he called candies. Always listen to your parents. I would be dead by now if it weren't for them. This happened just a few hours ago. My house is on the very edge of town, just before a large wooded area. We do have some neighbors. There are around 6 apartments in total, and some houses across the street as well. It was around 11 p.m. though, and at that time most of them are usually asleep or sitting in front of their TV, or perhaps even both. I went to take my dog on a walk when I noticed a bike leaning against the wall in the driveway. That seemed odd. There's a bike rack behind the house. I didn't really think much of it though, and continued on my way. When I came back, the bike was still there. Now, there are walls on both sides of the driveway, about 5 feet tall at the highest point just behind the gate. I looked up at the wall to my left, only to stare right into the cold, dead eyes of a woman crouching there on top of it. It scared the hell out of me. I just kinda stared back for a second. I had never seen this woman before. She didn't move whatsoever. My dog also seemed to be getting scared as well. I rushed over to my door and never took my eyes off her. Once we had gone past her, she leapt off the wall and began to follow us. At that point, my dog, a pretty big Doberman mix, began growling and barking furiously. Luckily, that seemed to make her change her mind and stop coming any closer. I got inside the house and locked the door behind me. I was sure as hell glad to have my big dog with me. I don't know who that woman was or what she was up to, but the scariest part is, I realized that she had probably been waiting there even when I initially left. I was born, raised, and still live in Texas. I come from a family of hunters. It's pretty much a family tradition. I'm going to tell you about something I experienced when I was 20 years old, back in 2005. My father had just been diagnosed with lung cancer, and naturally everyone in my family was devastated by this, especially me. My dad and I were very close. I had a lot of other personal stuff going on in my life at the time, and I felt like I needed to go out for a few days just to clear my head a bit. I decided to make it a solo hunting trip and packed up some camping gear, along with my Marlin 336 set my dad had gifted to me when I was 18 years old. If I could get sentimental for a moment, my father ended up passing away 3 years after his diagnosis, and to this day I still use that very same rifle for hunting. Anyway, this happened around late October or early November. I don't want to be too specific with the location, because technically I was not supposed to be hunting in this specific area. I will disclose that it was somewhere near the Mexican border. This will be important later. I decided to set up camp for 3 days before heading back. I had been hunting on this land before with some friends of mine, and I knew the precautions to take not to be spotted by the game warden. I'm sure if there's any other hunters listening to this broadcast, they'll be more than happy to tell you we often wipe our asses with the rule book. Before anyone judges me too harshly or the practice of hunting in general, I will say I'm a very spiritual person and have a profound respect for Mother Nature. I don't put trash everywhere, and every part of every animal I put down never goes to waste. I'll be the first to admit there are hunters that give us a bad name, and me not following rules is more of a middle finger to the government than it is to the sport of hunting. The first day went off without a hitch, no problems whatsoever, aside from the fact there was no game to be found anywhere. I figured I would head further south the next day to see if my luck would improve any. Other hunters knew about this restricted location and may have already cleaned out this area. As night fell, I found myself sprawled out next to my truck, staring at the night sky. I wondered if my dad and I would ever take another hunting trip together. That's when I heard the sound of footsteps slowly making their way through a nearby brush. This was alarming for obvious reasons. Whoever this was, they had the drop on me. I knew better than to light up a campfire under these circumstances, but if this person was roaming around in the dark without a flashlight, they may have had some kind of night vision apparatus, giving them the advantage. I was very concerned. If you were looking at me through the trees in that particular moment, it would have appeared as though I was sleeping. I was in an odd position where I was resting on top of my sleeping bag with a blanket because I felt claustrophobic being fully immersed in a sleeping bag. This happened to be a good thing because it meant I was able to mobilize myself quickly. Something told me I only had seconds to make a decision. I rolled sideways out of instinct, and as soon as I did so, I caught a glimpse of a muzzle flash coming from the tree line directly in front of me. I felt dirt fly in the air and hit my back from a bullet striking the ground where I had just been. I scrambled to my feet as more shots rang out from the trees. One of them shattered the passenger side window of my truck. I took cover behind the bed of my pickup and quickly drew the snub nose I had strapped to my ankle. After the gunfire ended, I laid down flat on the ground and returned fire in the direction of the trees from under the truck. I heard several sets of footsteps fleeing the area, but I held my position just in case my theory about night vision was correct. With only 2 rounds left in my revolver, I pretty much spent the rest of that night underneath my truck, pistol aimed at the darkness. I waited there until the sun came out and illuminated my surroundings. I very cautiously got out from beneath my vehicle and packed up my gear as quickly as I could. I hightailed it out of there. Later on, when I told a friend of mine about the incident, he said he wished I would have told him I was heading out that way. He said he would have warned me. The Mexican cartel had started using that area to smuggle contraband and people across the nearby border. This friend of mine was an immigrant from Mexico himself and had several family members mixed up in the cartel and coyote groups. Needless to say, I trusted his word. All things considered, I think I got off pretty easy. Had I been in my sleeping bag that night, no doubt that bullet would have nailed me. These days, I stick to designated hunting grounds. Some things are just not worth the risk. Okay, so buckle up because this is going to get weird. This isn't something unknown amongst my friends and the people local to me, as I live in quite a small town. In grade 5, I would have been about 13 or 14, and I had no friends. I was and still am kind of weird, and it tended to throw people off. Making friends in high school was so difficult for me, because I refused to change who I was just to fit in. During the second week of school, I met George in my English class. Our teacher had sat us together, and we had begun talking and building a friendship. George seemed very nice, and we had a lot in common as well. He had come from a different elementary school. It was odd because people from his area commonly went to a different high school, although he insisted he wanted to go to this one because there were certain classes he wanted to take that the other school didn't offer. After about a week of talking together during English, he asked if I wanted to eat lunch with him. We had the same lunch period, and he said he noticed how often I sat alone. I thought it was the nicest gesture, so I agreed. We ended up having lunch together for a while, but then I started making some new friends. I always invited him to eat lunch with a few of the friends I had made, but he always declined. Then, one day in English, he passed me a note. This was very strange since we were sitting right next to each other. It said something like, "I need to talk to you. Can we please sit alone together for lunch?" I wrote back I would sit down with him, and we hardly spoke for the rest of the period. I started getting really weird vibes from him. So, lunchtime rolled around. I saw him sitting at the end of a row. I go to sit down and he says, "No, let's go outside to talk." I agreed. He looked really upset. I wanted to know what was going on. When we got outside, he led me over to sit on a curb in front of the school and started talking very aggressively. He told me it was unfair of me to make other friends when he was the one who'd befriended me first. He told me I had to eat lunch with him because when I was alone, he ate lunch with me. Now that he was alone, I was obligated to do the same. It was a very bizarre conversation. I explained that he could sit with me and my friends, and that way there would be no issues. He could even make some new friends himself. I had enough friendship to spread around, and he had nothing to be upset about. What he said next completely shocked me. I could see the anger in his eyes. He grabbed my arm real hard. "I don't think you understand. You owe me this. You will sit with me." I got freaked out at that point and told him we could sit alone together every other day. I just wanted to get away from him and go back inside where more people were around. After that day, I started getting these weird messages in my email. I'll never forget the first one. All it said was, "All women are Satan. The devil lives in all of you." I didn't recognize the address and assumed it was some internet troll trying to scare me. Then they started coming more frequently, all with the same type of message. I started getting scared, so I showed my friends these emails. They agreed that it was weird, but also agreed it was probably some random person just trying to scare people. One of my friends, though, told me that she thought it was George. She had heard some stories about why he'd come to our school instead of going to the other one. She told me he was so obsessed with one of the girls in his class that her mom had to get a restraining order against him over the summer. I told her that sounded insane, and I didn't believe it. I was having lunch with George on alternate days, and we were still friendly during English class, but I was trying to distance myself from him. After Christmas break, our schedules changed for second semester. I was very happy about this, because I knew I'd have a different lunch period and we wouldn't have English together anymore. I could slowly disassociate myself from him. I was wrong. He started leaving notes in my locker, confessing his undying love and explaining that we were meant to take over the world together. The feelings were very much not mutual. I had to tell him that enough was enough. I explained he was overwhelming me, and I needed space from our friendship. He seemed to understand. He didn't get upset or yell. He just agreed to give me my space. In the meantime, the emails started getting much worse. They started threatening my life, telling me they knew where I lived and went to school. I went straight to my mom when this started happening. My mom called the police. The police informed the school. The school looked up the email in their records and found out it was indeed George sending those emails all along. He was suspended and wouldn't even look at me after. I was honestly so relieved. 1 year after we graduated high school, George and his mother went out for a drive. While she was driving, he stabbed her over 100 times. When the police found him, he tried saying it was a car accident, but when they questioned him further about all the stab wounds, he admitted to killing her. He claimed he was trying to release the devil from his mother's soul. He pleaded insanity and was found not criminally responsible for her murder. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. I know it's been quite a while since I did an outro. If you guys like this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback about the video itself, please be sure to leave it in the comments below. I always do read the comments, although with me recording every day, I don't have as much time to respond to them anymore. If you guys have a story you would like to send in yourselves, please be sure to look in the description below the video. There will be links to my Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail accounts. You can go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to your story as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, the type of story, if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Also, please be sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and as much correct grammar as possible, to ensure the best chances of your story appearing in a video. I think that's about it for this video here. Let me know if you guys have any thoughts about the channel or anything, and thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great day.